You know what still makes me sick? A man who literally built an empire of abuse in public. A man who committed crimes out in the open for decades while everybody just closed their eyes and pretended not to see. Because that's really the thing about abusers, right? They don't actually need to hide in the dark when the whole room is already on their side. And the worst part, the pattern you're about to hear is so much bigger than Epstein, much bigger. It's happening right now around you every day, and most people will never even admit that they see it. Everybody's talking about the Epstein files, right? And every time they resurface, the same predictable noise starts. Political name dropping, conspiracy theories, and people trying to turn this into a left versus right thing. And I'm not doing that. This isn't about politics. It's not. This is about power. This is about misogyny. This is about how abusive men hide in plain sight for years because they know that they can. And yes, you're going to notice who he surrounded himself with. Obviously, that part matters. But it's not the story that I'm telling here. What I care about is what this reveals about abusive men in general. And I'm warning you now, this gets uncomfortable because once I say it, you can't unsee it. Epstein is actually the perfect example of the truth that women have already learned the hard way, right? Abusers don't hide because they don't have to. He didn't work in secret. He didn't sneak around. He was flying people in and out, moving money, building networks, recruiting girls through friends of friends. None of it was subtle. And I'll tell you the part that nobody wants to admit out loud. The only reason that he got away with it is because powerful men benefit when other men get away with it. And that's not me being dramatic. That's the historical pattern. Look at Weinstein, Cosby, R. Kelly, Larry Nassar. Different industries, all the same damn playbook. Everyone around them knew, and they did nothing. And let's be even more honest here, because this is the part that everybody wants to avoid saying. Many of the men around Epstein weren't horrified because they would never do something like this. They were horrified because he got caught. Men with a similar entitlement or similar patterns or fantasies, they just watched their worst fear unfold, right? Not the fear of hurting someone. No, the fear of exposure. And before anybody says, well, that's Hollywood or that's politics, I'm going to bring it home. You've seen the same dynamic in your own life. The abusive ex whose family didn't want to get involved. I certainly experienced that, right? The coworkers who never saw anything. The friend group that didn't believe you because, hey, he's so nice. Really? Jeffrey? Oh, I can't imagine. Abusers rely on other people to stay quiet. It's what allows them to operate in front of everyone. Epstein just had richer, more powerful friends than your ex did. And there's one detail that's honestly buried in all of these files that tells you everything about how abusers operate in plain sight. But I'm going to come back to that because there's something that I need you to hear first. But I'll come back to that because I need you to hear something else first. Now, a lot of people talk about predators, right? As if they're like wild animals, like they lose control and they can't help themselves. No, that's a myth. Men like Epstein are actually very strategic. They're highly organized. They're calculating. Evan Stark talks about coercive control as a system, not an outburst. Don Hennessy literally writes that abusers plan their tactics. Lundy Bancroft has been saying for decades, abusive men know exactly what they're doing. They are not confused. They are not sick. They are not broken. They are not lacking empathy the way that people think, right? Their empathy is actually selective. They just don't care about the women and girls that they hurt. And that's the uncomfortable part. This isn't rare. It is so normal in abusive men. And if you want an even more brutal truth, tons of men still defend Epstein to this day. You can see it on TV. You can see it on social media, in the comment sections, in videos, right? They call the girls prostitutes. They're tracking victims and people are calling them underage prostitutes, even though the law says they're too young to consent. Make it make sense. They're trafficking victims. They say, oh, those girls knew exactly what they're doing. They say things like he didn't need to force anyone. That tells you everything that you need to know about why abuse thrives, right? The world doesn't just fail to protect girls. Parts of the world openly resent them for exposing what men do. I'm Lisa Sonni. I'm a toxic and abusive relationship expert and certified coach, and I help women break trauma bonds and rebuild self-worth and stop mistaking manipulation for love. Hit subscribe because the more you understand these patterns, the harder it is for abusive men to ever pull you into their world again. Now, back to what I said earlier, because everything I'm saying here is actually leading to a truth that so many people just don't want to hear. We assume that predators are kind of obvious, right? They're like creepy and socially awkward, even mentally unstable. We imagine a monster, not a man in a suit who donates to charities and shakes hands with politicians with the world's top 1%. That's our first mistake. Abusers are often charismatic and fun and generous, but only to the people that they want on their side. The rich ones, they donate money, not because they care, but because it buys silence. They surround themselves with people who like the lifestyle too much to ask questions. And that creates the environment where a man can run a trafficking network while being invited to elite events and photographed with celebrities and trusted by so many institutions. And let's go even further, because this is where the pattern matches everyday abuse. This entitlement to access young female bodies is the same entitlement that your ex used when he thought he was owed sex, silence, forgiveness, or owed access to your body. Yeah, the scale is different, I get that, but the psychology is the same. The entitlement is the same. And the part that makes me sick, right? The outrage that we saw from everybody when the story finally broke, it was never about the girls. It was about optics. It was about reputations. It was about people scrambling to distance themselves to save themselves. It was about brands and institutions all desperately trying to avoid the backlash. It was never about the victims. Because if it were, someone would have stopped him decades earlier. We're not going to pretend that people didn't know this is happening. And the other thing that nobody else wants to admit, powerful men in these circles, they have long used NDAs and settlements and these private agreements that nobody's allowed to talk about and intimidation to just shut women up. It is literally standard practice. It's not rare. Epstein didn't invent it. He perfected it. That's why victims didn't come forward earlier. They knew exactly what would happen to them if they did. We know because it's happening to them all now. So, to my point, let's talk about the girls. Because society didn't protect them. Society didn't believe them, right? Society blamed them. Epstein didn't just target naive teens. He targeted girls living in poverty, girls trying to survive with unstable home lives who are already dismissed by the world. And here's the most disturbing part. He didn't always send men to recruit new victims, right? He used girls. He used traumatized, vulnerable teenage girls to recruit other vulnerable teens because it lowered suspicion, and he knew it. And that's one of the darkest parts of this whole case, right? That's how systemic this was. That is how deep his manipulation ran. And this is where a lot of people get really uncomfortable because you can't understand Epstein without understanding the way that this world really treats teenage girls. We adultify them, we sexualize them, we call them fast, or we say things like, oh, you're really mature for your age. We act like a 14-year-old girl has an ounce of agency in a room with a billionaire. People love to pretend they knew what they were doing. No, they didn't. They were groomed, they were coerced and manipulated, and they were children. And yeah, it's not lost on me that the only person sitting in prison right now for this entire operation is a woman, Ghislaine Maxwell. And we need to talk about that because it actually proves how these systems work. And listen, she wasn't some clueless bystander, right? She was an active predator, a recruiter, a facilitator. I am not excusing that. And at the same time, she was also operating inside a world built by men for men, where women are often used as the front-facing shield for male violence. I'm not calling her a victim. I'm saying it's telling that the men with the money and the power, the access, the connections walked away untouched, while the woman who helped them became the face of the fallout. That's strategy. Now, the next part is the reason that so many women watching right now were never believed in their own lives, right? Society would rather believe a powerful man is being wrongly accused than believe a girl or a woman who doesn't have the same power. People don't want to believe women because believing women kind of forces them to really face how common male violence actually is. And as far as I'm concerned, we all just prefer to live with our blinders on and pretending that it's rare, pretending that it's those men, that it's this group of men that's tiny and over there and we don't know them. They don't want to face how many men they know are actually capable of this. They don't want to face that they ignored the signs or that they laughed at the jokes, excused the behavior, or benefited from the exact same systems. It's so much easier to believe that the victims are lying than admit men like Epstein exist everywhere. And if you want the blunt version of that truth, the world doesn't actually care about girls unless they're useful to men. There is a video on the internet right now going around of a grown man, he's got to be in his 50s, talking about how if you put any man of any age alone on an island with a 14-year-old girl, every single man would choose to do something. Not all men, right? I don't think so. But let me give you the thing that I hinted at earlier, okay? The detail in the files that actually tells the entire story. The number of people who knew, not guessed, not suspected, right? People who actually knew. Think about this. Staff, associates, friends, people who had access, people who saw the girls, people who handed over passports, people who scheduled flights, meetings, people who covered logistics, people who noticed the patterns and said nothing. That's how abusers hide in plain sight. They don't hide at all. They build abuse into their daily operations, and then they surround themselves with people who prefer their own comfort over someone else's safety. And you know what? People reported him. People warned the authorities. We act like none of the girls spoke up. That's not true. And nothing happened for years, not because nobody knew, but because nobody wanted the responsibility of acting. Everybody just let him do it. You think that's an accident? That is a system working exactly how it was designed. And before anyone tries to drag this into a men versus women argument, let me be clear. This isn't about all men. This is about abusive men. And abusive men protect each other, consciously or not, through silence and jokes and denial and deflection, and that whole boys will be boys culture that excuses everything from sexual harassment to assault. That's the pattern that keeps men like Epstein safe for decades. It's the same pattern that kept your ex safe. And you want to know the ugliest truth? Epstein didn't hide because abusive men learned a long time ago they do not have to. So here's what I want you to take from all of this, because this matters to your life, right? It's not just headlines. When you told someone that your partner was hurting you and they brushed it off, you were not crazy. When people pretended not to see his cruelty, they were not blind. They just did not want to be responsible for the truth. When you felt like you were screaming into the void, it's because the systems around you were built to protect him, not you. Epstein is just the largest, ugliest version of what women deal with every single day. And the biggest lesson in these files, nobody's talking about the lesson. Abuse thrives when the environment is more invested in protecting some man's reputation than protecting women's literal lives. Welcome to the patriarchy, right? That's how we got away with it for so long. That's how your ex got away with it too. Different scale, I get it, but it's the same logic. Power protects itself. Men protect each other. Systems protect the ones who benefit from them. And who's paying the price? Women. So if this hit home for you, and if you're rebuilding after leaving an abusive relationship, book a private session with me. This is the work that I do every day. And if you want more truth like this, subscribe and tell me in the comments what parts of this video made the most sense.